War films aren't supposed to feel like this. So why did veterans walk out of these silent? These weren't heroic. They weren't clean. They showed something most war movies avoid, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Hidden in the 1970s, these British films didn't just tell stories. They exposed what war actually felt like. And one of them was so disturbingly real. It changed how soldiers saw their own past forever. 12. Too Late the Hero, 1970. Everything in this film happens too late. Orders arrive late. Decisions are made late. Understanding comes late. And each delay carries a cost. Too late, the hero removes one of the most comforting illusions in war stories, that timing can be controlled. Here, it can't. The jungle setting amplifies that loss of control. Visibility disappears. Communication breaks. Direction becomes uncertain. And without clarity, action becomes reaction. That's where the tension builds. Because reaction is always behind. Every move feels like a response to something already gone wrong. And once that pattern starts, it doesn't stop. Veterans recognized this immediately. Because not every mission unfolds as planned. Sometimes confusion becomes the dominant force. And when confusion takes over, structure collapses. What remains isn't strategy. It's survival. Moment to moment. The film doesn't offer resolution. Because resolution requires control. And here, control was lost long before the mission began. 11. The Last Grenade, 1970. At first, it feels familiar. A soldier pulled back for one last mission, a clear objective, a structured plan. But The Last Grenade slowly removes that clarity, because this isn't about purpose. It's about being dragged backward. The mission never feels necessary. It feels imposed. I'd like something unresolved forcing itself back into the present. And that tension never lifts. It deepens. The violence reflects that shift. It's not triumphant, not even strategic. It's abrupt, disruptive, almost inconvenient. Moments don't build, they collapse. Plans don't unfold, they fracture. And that's what unsettled audiences, because the film doesn't frame war as something that shapes identity. It shows it as something that interrupts it, breaking rhythm, breaking direction, breaking whatever came before. Veterans understood that immediately, because returning to conflict isn't always about duty. Sometimes it's about something unfinished, something that never really ended. And when it returns, it doesn't feel like action. It feels like repetition, like being pulled into a cycle you thought you had escaped. Not progress, just return. Chapter 10. The Triple Echo, 1972. War usually changes the outside. Here, it changes identity. The Triple Echo focuses on a soldier hiding from conflict, not by running, but by becoming someone else. At first, it feels like escape, a rural setting, isolation, distance from command, a slower pace that suggests safety. But that distance doesn't remove pressure. It shifts it inward. Because maintaining a false identity isn't freedom. It's tension. Every interaction carries risk. Every moment requires control. Every word, every gesture has to be measured. And slowly, the line between performance and reality begins to blur. That's where the film becomes unsettling. Not because of violence, but because of transformation. A war doesn't just force people into situations. It forces them into roles. And sometimes those roles don't disappear when the danger passes. They linger, quietly, persistently. Veterans connected with this differently. Because not all changes from war are visible. Some are internal, subtle, gradual. And once they take hold, they don't reverse easily. They reshape behavior, thought, identity itself, until the question isn't who you were before, but whether that version still exists at all. The film doesn't dramatize this. It lets it unfold quietly, and that quiet shift is what makes it feel real. 9. The Mackenzie Break, 1970. No battlefield, no explosions, just control. The Mackenzie Break places its tension inside a POW camp, but what makes it powerful isn't confinement. It's observation. Every movement is watched. Every conversation carries weight. Every interaction feels calculated. And slowly, something becomes clear. This isn't about keeping prisoners in. It's about understanding them. That shift changes everything. Because the danger isn't physical, it's psychological. pressure builds without visible force. Decisions are influenced without direct commands. Control exists without confrontation. And that's what makes it feel real. Because war doesn't always rely on violence. Sometimes it relies on awareness. Veterans who experienced interrogation or surveillance understood this immediately. Because the most effective control isn't loud. It's quiet and constant. There are no sudden breaks in tension here, just a slow tightening. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to tell whether the prison is physical or something else entirely. 8. The password is courage. 1970. It doesn't begin with action. It begins with routine. A prisoner camp, guards watching, soldiers waiting. But what the password is courage does differently is remove urgency. There's no rush to escape, no dramatic countdown, just repetition, digging, planning, failing, starting again. And that's where the realism settles in. Because war, for many, it wasn't constant movement. It was waiting, watching time stretch, hope shrinking quietly. The escape attempts aren't heroic. They're exhausting. Every small success feels temporary. Every mistake feels permanent. Veterans recognized that rhythm immediately. Not the idea of escape, but the feeling of being stuck inside something that doesn't move. Because sometimes war isn't about survival in battle. It's about endurance in stillness. And stillness can be harder to survive. 7. No blade of grass. 1970. It doesn't announce itself as war. There are no uniforms, no commands, no battle lines, just silence, and then collapse. No blade of grass begins with something distant, a crop virus, but the threat spreads quietly, and what follows isn't organized conflict. It's something more unsettling, because structure disappears first. Governments fail, systems stop, and without structure, something else replaces it. Instinct, not strategy, not coordination, just reaction. People don't unite, they divide. Roads become territories, conversations become threats, survival becomes negotiation, and the violence feels different, not explosive, casual, sudden, unannounced, almost normalized. That's what made it disturbing. Because it suggests something uncomfortable. War doesn't always arrive with intention. Sometimes it forms when control disappears. Veterans recognize that immediately, not in setting, but in behavior. Because the unpredictability, the sudden shift from order to chaos, that's something no training prepares you for. And once it begins, there's no clear enemy, no defined objective, no structured end. Only movement, only consequence, only outcomes. 6. Operation Daybreak, 1975. It begins like a mission. Clear objective, defined target, structured execution. Everything appears controlled. Operation Daybreak follows the real assassination of Reinhard Heydrich. But what it reveals isn't the success of the mission. It's the aftermath. Because the operation works, and then everything collapses. Retaliation arrives quickly. Civilians become targets. Entire communities pay the price for a single act. That's where the film shifts, from strategy to consequence. And that shift is immediate. There's no transition, no time to process. Just escalation. What makes it powerful is its refusal to isolate the event. It connects action to outcome directly. Veterans understood that connection because in real conflict, nothing exists alone. Every decision creates a chain, and those chains extend far beyond the battlefield. The film doesn't offer justification. It presents reality. Action leads to reaction. Success leads to loss. And sometimes the cost of doing something right is something far harder to accept. 5. Overlord, 1975. This doesn't feel like a film. It feels like memory. Overlord blends fictional narrative with real wartime footage, and that combination removes distance between viewer and event. There's no clear boundary between storytelling and reality. And that's what makes it powerful. Because the film doesn't present war as a sequence of moments. It presents it as a process. Training, waiting, moving, preparing. Each step feels ordinary, until it isn't. The protagonist isn't defined by heroism. He's defined by participation. One person among many. Moving towards something already in motion, that lack of individuality changes the tone. Because war here isn't about what someone chooses. It's about what they become part of. Veterans recognized this immediately. Because most didn't experience war as a single defining moment. They experienced it as accumulation. Small steps leading towards something larger, something unavoidable. The film reflects that structure. It builds slowly, quietly, and by the time it reaches its conclusion, the outcome feels inevitable, not dramatic, just expected. And that expectation is what makes it feel real. 4. The Eagle Has Landed, 1976. It begins like a perfect plan, precise, calculated, controlled, a covert mission designed to succeed before it even starts. But The Eagle Has Landed slowly dismantles that illusion, because perfection in war doesn't last. The operation depends on disguise, timing, and silence. Every step is measured, every movement intentional. And for a while, it works. And that's what makes the shift so effective. Because when something goes wrong, it doesn't collapse immediately. It fractures. Small mistakes, slight delays, minor exposures, each one manageable on its own. But together, they compound. And that's when control disappears. The tension doesn't come from the plan itself. It comes from watching it fall apart in real time. Veterans understood this pattern instantly. Because failure in war isn't always sudden. Sometimes it builds quietly until it can't be contained. The film doesn't dramatize the breakdown. It observes it. And that observation reveals something uncomfortable, that even the most disciplined operations are fragile, not because of weakness, but because of unpredictability. 3. Cross of Iron, 1977. There's no distance here, no safety between the viewer and what's happening. Cross of Iron removes the separation most war films rely on. The camera doesn't observe, it immerses. Mud covers everything. Explosions interrupt without warning. Movement feels chaotic, not choreographed. And that chaos isn't stylized. It's overwhelming. There's no clear direction, no stable ground, just constant pressure. What makes the film even more unsettling is its perspective. It follows German soldiers, not to justify them, but to remove simplicity. Because once perspective shifts, the idea of clear sides begins to dissolve. Veterans recognize this immediately, because war isn't experienced as ideology. It's experienced as environment, and that environment doesn't pause to explain itself. It surrounds. The film reflects that. Dialogue is secondary. Structure is minimal. Everything is driven by movement, reaction, survival. And within that, something becomes clear. That war doesn't organize itself around meaning. It exists as condition, a space where clarity disappears, where actions happen before understanding, and where consequences arrive without warning. The film doesn't guide the viewer. It places them inside. And once inside, there's no clean way out. 2. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. It starts with confidence, a plan built on precision, strategy layered with coordination, everything accounted for, everything aligned. A Bridge Too Far reconstructs Operation Market Garden as something that should have worked, and that's exactly why it didn't, because the more detailed the plan becomes, the more fragile it is. Communication delays begin first, small miscalculations follow. Our assumptions start to fail, and none of it seems critical at the time. That's what makes it real, because collapse doesn't announce itself. It develops. Each error connects to the next. Each delay amplifies the last. And slowly, structure turns into confusion. The film doesn't rush this process. It lets it unfold, which makes the outcome feel inevitable. Veterans understood this immediately, because not all failures come from chaos. Some come from systems that were too confident to adapt. That's what the film exposes. Not incompetence, but rigidity, the inability to adjust once things start to shift. And once that happens, recovery becomes impossible. What remains isn't drama, it's frustration. Because the outcome feels preventable, but only in hindsight. And that's what makes it stay with you. It's not the scale of the operation, but the realization that it was never as controlled as it seemed. 1. Overlord, 1975. There's no single moment where everything changes. No turning point, no defining action, just progression. Overlord doesn't build toward war. It moves through it. The film follows a single soldier, but never isolates him. He exists within a system already in motion. Training sequences blend into preparation. Preparation transitions into deployment. Deployment leads into something final. And through all of it, nothing feels dramatic. That's what makes it powerful. Because war isn't presented as an event. It's presented as a process. And once that process begins, it doesn't stop. The integration of real wartime footage removes any sense of distance. What you're watching doesn't feel recreated. It feels remembered. Veterans connected with that immediately. Because most didn't experience war as a series of defining moments. They experienced it as accumulation, steps leading forward without full awareness of where they end. That's what the film captures, not action, but inevitability. The sense that everything is moving towards something already decided, and the individual is just part of that movement. There's no attempt to elevate or dramatize, no effort to frame meaning. The film allows events to exist without interpretation. And that absence of explanation is what makes it feel real. Because sometimes the most accurate portrayal of war isn't showing what it meant, it's showing how little control anyone had within it. These films didn't try to impress you. They forced you to confront something most war stories hide. Here's no clean victories, no clear meaning, just reality, unfiltered and unresolved. And that's why they were overlooked. Because truth doesn't always entertain. It unsettles. But once you've seen it this way, every other war film feels different. And the question is, how much of it was ever real?